Tonight's story is going to be called A Bug's Life, and it's a story based about the movie about some bugs, basically ants who are being attacked by the grasshoppers.
We watched that one.
We watched it, didn't we?
Next year.
Okay, so let's talk about the bug's life.
Bugs life.
So I'm just going to tell it to you more from my head than reading the words. So this ant is called
Flock.
Flick.
The flock.
Flick Flock, well it says Flick actually. And this is the one with the crown is Princess Atta.
Princess Atta.
And Flick keeps making inventions like this telescope made of a leaf with a drop of water in it. She gets a bit fed up with his inventions because they don't usually work. Now, there's a big enemy of the ants called the grasshoppers. The grasshoppers come every year to get the grains that the ants are supposed to leave on a big stone. Anyway, the grasshoppers arrived asking for their grain, and it's all waiting on a big stone. Unfortunately, Flick knocks over the stone, and all the grains fall off.
Into the water.
And the ants are the grasshoppers are very cross, and the other ants are cross with Flick because
And the food's in the water.
and the food's in the water, and grasshoppers are now very angry with the ants, and they demand double.
Double.
Yep. The whole colony was scared, the colony of ants. But Flick had another idea. He would go to the big city to find even bigger bugs to fight Hopper. Hopper's the grasshopper, because he wanted to defend the colony against the grasshoppers. So off he goes to the city. When he got there were many big bugs like giant spiders, caterpillars, all sorts of animals and insects. So he brings them back to the colony. Here's a stick insect, for example. Of course, the insects which have come to the ant colony think because they're circus performers and they've lost their jobs in the city, they think they come to put on an act for the ants. But they don't know it, but they're really there to defend the ants. Now, one thing that Flick decides to do to worry the grasshoppers is to make a giant fake bird out of leaves and things. So it looks like a bird, but it's not really a bird. But grasshoppers are afraid of birds. So he makes a fake bird.
He's scared.
To frighten away the grasshoppers. So when the grasshoppers come and see the bird, they're very frightened. But then the grasshoppers see that the ants are inside the bird, and it's not really a real bird at all, it's a toy bird. So the ants get chased by the grasshoppers. The grasshopper seizes the queen ant by the neck and holds her tightly. And he says, we're going to make those ants work until they drop of exhaustion, and then we'll squash the queen. So that evening, the grasshoppers feasted on the ants' grain, and Flick organised all the circus performing insects to put on a show for the grasshoppers. But while the grasshoppers were watching the show, Flick climbed into the bird machine, and then all at once he flapped the bird and flew down towards the grasshoppers, making screeching noises. Screaming in terror, the grasshoppers ran for their lives. And it was all going as planned because they were afraid of the pretend bird. But then Flick climbed out of the blazing bird, and the grasshopper knew he'd been tricked. Then it started to rain, Everybody ran for cover. Hopper, the grasshopper, grabbed Flick, but Atta, his friend, snatched him away. Hopper chased after them, following Flick to the sparrow's nest. Hopper, the grasshopper, thought that Flick had built another bird, but before he realized it, the sparrow was flying down. The sparrow was real. The sparrow was a bird. Hopper looked up just in time to see the bird heading towards him, and the bird opened his big mouth and gobbled up Hopper in one gulp. And of course that meant there was no more grasshopper, and they never bothered Flick and his friends again. The end. Would you like to get in bed? Would you like one more story? Not the same one, of course. How about this one? You come and get in bed and I'll tell you this one. We'll just talk about the pictures, okay? There's a little boy and a little girl in the picture. And they both look very bored.
Bored. What's bored?
Bored means they don't know what to do. They've got nothing to do. They want to do something like play or read a book, but they're not doing that. They're just bored. Now, the girl in the picture is called Esther.
And the boy?
The boy's name, I'll tell you in a minute when I find it. She's found a dead bee, un bourdon mort, a dead bee, and she's playing it.
Why? Why?
She's stroking its back, which is soft and covered in furs. My poor little bee, she says, I love you. I wouldn't be loving a little bee myself. She shows it to the little boy, but he doesn't want to touch it.
Why?
He's frightened it would sting him, but it's dead, it won't. Come on, says the little girl, I'm going to dig his grave. Do you know what a grave is?
No.
A grave is where you put the dead people in, like in the cemetery. But you can also bury a bee if you want. So they take the spade, put the bee in a little box, and off they go to bury the bee, which is dead. She digs a hole. They put the box with the bee in it into the hole and cover it with earth. And on top of the earth, they put a little cross and some flowers. Esther's very sad to say goodbye to her bee. She cries and rubs her nose, which is dripping. My poor, poor little bee. I wish the life can continue.
Is that Esther?
Yes.
But what's that attitude's name?
And then she says, do you know what?
And this one?
Oh, it doesn't say.
That's him.
Oh, Lolo is the frere. The little boy is called Lolo. His name is Lolo. He's the brother of Esther. And then Esther tells them there's going to be lots of dead things if you look. Every bush, every tree will have a dead thing in it. Maybe a dead butterfly, maybe a dead mouse, maybe a dead bird. You never know what you'll find which is dead when you look in the grass or you look in the bushes. So the children start to look around for something else which is dead.
But what's this? What's
And
this?
finally they found a little mole, a dead one. Esther checks him and she says, yes, he's definitely dead. Why isn't he moving, says Lolo, the little boy. Because he's dead. And then Esther picks him up, but the little boys don't want to touch him.
Why?
Then they go to dig another hole and bury the little mole in a hole with another cross. Now they've got two animals buried there. Next, they find a hedgehog, but the hedgehog might be sleeping, or it might be dead. But they decide to bury it as well. And then they find a dead partridge. And they dig a hole for that one and bury it. And they're burying a lot of things. And then they find some dead herrings. These are fish, herrings are fish. And they put them in boxes to be buried. And then grandmother had 9 mice caught in the mice traps. Usually she used to give them to the cats, but Esther takes them and she buries the mice one by one in the garden, making little holes for each mouse. And that, I think, must be the end of the story. No, it's not the end of the story. Now they found a hedgehog to bury. Then they find a dead rabbit. They put him in the case, ready to be buried. And then they find a dead blackbird. Bury it. And one by one, they made a little graveyard with all the dead things in a clearing in the wood. Bit of a sad story, really. She did find a lot of dead things. You never find anything more dead than a dead fly, do you? But I guess if you looked in the forest, you'd find some dead things. If you looked in the bushes,
But it would take a long time.
it would. Yeah, you've got better things to do with your time, haven't you?
That won't get my time.
You've got lots of good things to do. There we are. Good night, little boy. Do you want your pig to lie with? Okay, I'll take that away. You can't play with that in the night. Okay, lie down then. Lie down. Lie down. And I might give. Lie down properly. Lie down in the middle of the bed. In the middle. Imagine right in the middle. Right. Do you want it really?
Yes.
Okay, you can have it. But get up now. Good night. I love you, Dave.